Courage is the one that we require when our values are tested. So when our values are tested, when someone's testing you about your integrity, it requires courage to push through that. Often when we're facing challenges in our life and we're not feeling good about where we're at and whatever it is we're trying to achieve, it's likely that one of your values is being tested, which is the reason why you're potentially not getting what you're looking for in your life.
San Diego 911 emergency. You need to come right away. There's a man with a gun and it's loaded. Receiving emergency signal from 4 George 1141. Got a white female down. We need paramedics closely. All available units roll code that
way. Welcome to the De-Escalation Conversations podcast. With me today is a guy that I've known for a couple of years now, Torrin Minutillo. And Torrin is in Perth, Australia. And we've never met in person. Like, I've never had the opportunity to shake his hand, but I virtually shake his hand almost every week for at least an hour and sometimes more. And every time I've had a conversation with Torrin, I walk away with some new golden nugget of knowledge or insight or way of approaching life. He's just been one of those hugely impactful and influential people in my life. And I'm forever grateful to the universe for bringing us together. It's just been an amazing thing. And let me tell you a little bit about Torrin. He's a seasoned business veteran who is completely proven under fire. He has a 34-year business journey that started in a time before mobile phones and before internet instant communication. And his journey was riddled with many highs and lows. And just the first 20 years before he cracked the code, and he now enjoys a business life that seemed impossible at one point. And the turning point was driven by getting a deep understanding of the human experience and applying it to the business experience. And that real life adaptations, they prepared him well for what he's passionate about doing now, which is helping other business owners on their journey to conquer their dreams. And one of the things he talks about that we're going to be talking about today is empowering achievement with courage. Now, with all that said about Torrin, as a man, how he shows up in this world is one of, you've heard of people who give to others. Torrin is just, he's got a wheelbarrow with him at all times of help and assistance and guidance. And he's just an amazing man. So we're really fortunate to have him here. And Torrin, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Kerry. What a fantastic introduction. And hopefully I can live up to that status.
You certainly can. Trust me on that. Now, for our listeners, we generally almost always have first responders, police, fire, medical services personnel, and school teachers. But we also have a lot of people in those areas who have businesses of their own, or they're thinking about becoming an entrepreneur. They have, firefighters that have construction side gigs, and cops that start businesses of their own, and school teachers that are looking for, maybe an exit plan or something to do in the summer and vacation times. And I love having folks who aren't from those areas, but bring knowledge and wisdom and insights from the business world. And the reality is, Torrin, what you teach isn't just for somebody running a business. So if you're thinking, I'm just doing my job, I'm not doing a business, I don't need to listen to this stuff from Torrin. Everything that Torrin shares is what I call 360 knowledge. It works in every aspect of your life. It works with your family at home. It works when you run up to the grocery store for a gallon of milk. It works if you are doing anything business related, or check this out, folks. If you're just trying to achieve some dreams in your life, what do you want to accomplish? Where do you want to go in your life? What path are you on to be truly happy? And Torrin has knowledge that just helps you with all that. So Torrin, thanks thanks for being with us today. Thanks for taking the time. And one of the things that you have talked about, I don't have it handy. There's a quote by C.S. Lewis, and he talks about courage being one of those things that helps you get through different times when your values are tested. And over the, since even before the pandemic shutdown occurred, and really values became very much focused for people during the last 3 to 4 years, and certainly in the United States, with a lot of controversy on the political ends of things and social topics and, being woke or not woke and things like that. We run up against values conversations a lot. And when you talk about courage and an empowering achievement with courage, can you share just kind of expand on that for us and kind of give us your insights on that?
Yeah, well, I suppose the starting point is to understand that values are the substructure to our life. And so values are instilled in us at a very young age by our significant carers or the people that we spend most of our time with in the first, say, 4 to 5 years of our life, 6 years potentially. Or, that's not a fixed amount of time because it can, depending on the circumstance. So values tend to be with you throughout your life, and they get established early, and not judging on which ones are better or worse. It's just they are the ones that we use to navigate our pathway through life, as opposed to, say, belief systems, which will evolve and go as depending our situation in our life is. We'll shift our belief systems, which is also a way of navigating your life. But values, the way that I like to think about it, is the substructure. It's nothing underneath it. Everything is built up from your values. So going back to C.S. Lewis, and his quote around this is that there are as many different types of values, or can be described as virtues, but courage is the one that we require when our values are tested. So when our values are tested, when someone's testing you about your integrity, it requires courage to push through that. Often when we're facing challenges in our life and we're not feeling good about where we're at and whatever it is we're trying to achieve, it's likely that one of your values is being tested, which is the reason why you're potentially not getting what you're looking for in your life. And so for me, when I'm helping people evolve, to go back a little bit, just to give a bit more context, is I put myself in the box as a business life mentor. So the life bit, business, because that's my field of expertise, but it's the life mentoring collected with the business that is what I help people. And really what I'm doing is helping them to evolve for a better version of themselves so they can get the best of whatever it is they're trying to achieve. That's what at the core of what I do. So courage plays a huge part in achieving anything that we want. So if you think about, if anybody's listening to this, think about whatever they've achieved in their life that they felt good about. It's often required a level of courage to push through a barrier that's helped them get that result or whatever it is. And often when they look back and go, well, I haven't achieved something, it's potentially that they pushed up against the courage barrier and came back and didn't push through. And so it becomes a very a line that when we live above the line of courage, if you want to put in that context, we tend to empower ourselves and achieve what we want. When we live below the line of courage and we don't push up against it, it disempowers us and moves us away from what it is that we're trying to achieve. So courage becomes quite a determining factor between what we get and what we don't get. So that's sort of an unpacking, if you like, of C.S. Lewis's version of this, which is that it becomes the foundational value that we require when other values are being tested.
Yeah. So let's talk about courage for just a minute if we can.
Yep, sure.
on the on the day that I was getting officially promoted to sergeant on the police department, San Diego Police Department, I was in my dress uniform, like long sleeve shirt, tie, and I was just killing time until I went to the promotion ceremony because I was working day shift. So the promotion ceremony was toward the end of my shift. And I was just hanging out, just trying to not get involved in anything. And a call came out just a few blocks away of a building fire. And I thought, well, I'll roll over and I'll do some traffic control. You know, I'll block a street for the fire truck. So, you know, I can do that. And I ended up running into a fully engulfed burning building and rescuing 3 people. And somebody said to me, and it was funny, I went to the promotion ceremony. I got doused with, like, as I was leaving the house, the firefighters had arrived, and they were, because when I got there, I was the first one on scene. Nobody else was there. And I was told that there were people inside. And so as I got the third person out and I was kind of covering up, you know, the firefighter put water onto the house and it exploded through a window, and just this big stream of water came down and doused both of us. And I'm like, oh my God. So I went to this promotion ceremony. I stunk like smoke and I had dried off by that point, but I'm like, I don't have another dress uniform to change into. And I got to go. So, but somebody had made a remark about not being scared to run into a burning building. And they said something about, was it because you were a firefighter before you were a cop that you weren't scared about running that burning building? It wasn't that I wasn't scared. I was blind terrified. Nobody runs into a burning building and not be scared. If you are, you're a freaking fool. And I think that's one of the things about courage is it's not the absence of fear. Because I think the fear is always there, whether it's public speaking or, you know, I think back to both of my officer-involved shootings when I was on the job. I was involved in 2 fatal ones during my career. And both times I was scared then too. But how do you balance out this? I'm going to push through. And I really liked what you said about pushing up against the courage wall. Yeah. But how do you balance out this fear? And when you don't go forward, because fear keeps us safe, fear, you and I know that at IDEA, we talk a lot about fear and the fear response, fight, flight, or freeze, and the other F's that go along with it. And this is such a complicated subject sometimes. And I want to keep it at the 4th grade level so we can just like remember it in times of stress. But do you see where I'm going for unpacking that?
Totally. Yeah. So I think, to like all these, whenever I get asked a question like this, my mind immediately goes, well, let's just break it down a bit and then build back up to make an answer rather than sometimes you give an answer that I understand, but people who haven't deconstructed it, maybe like I have before or you have, don't quite get it. So, you know,
deconstruct it for my 4th grade level because
well, I think and words. I may do a good job or not, but it also comes back to this overarching premise: is that that whatever it is you're trying to understand or achieve or move, is that there's a process of deconstructing it first before you can reconstruct. So often, what happens, people make a mistake of okay, I've got this issue, I'm just going to reconstruct. I'm going to reconstruct on top. So if you're going to pull your bathroom apart and renovate it, you'd take it all right back down to the substructure, you'd deconstruct it, and then you'd build it back up so you got a nice new bathroom. You wouldn't go and put your new tiles and your new taps and your new glassware on top of what's already there.
Yeah. I love that analogy. It's a great analogy.
So I think when we're trying to understand anything, if we deconstruct it first, and okay, what's the bits that we don't need to understand, and then let's layer that with the bits that we do need to understand. And that's, you know, for those who are in business, that's actually a pathway of figuring out how do I get to where I want to go next. And I'll come back to your question. I haven't forgotten that. Is, well, let's figure out how you got to where you are now. Let's deconstruct that, take all the bits that aren't useful, and then we'll layer on top and integrate with the bits that are useful to get the result that we want, as opposed to let's just keep layering on top that. In other words, you don't have a good foundation, so therefore we need to fix that before we worry about the next thing. So come back to courage. I think when you deconstruct it, our nervous system is trying to keep us safe. I think everybody understands that the reason, or maybe they don't, and this is part of the deconstruction, is that the reason fear comes up is because that's the nervous system's job, to keep us safe. So what this does is creates a negative bias in everything we're doing. And so when you're standing in front of that building and it's on fire, in milliseconds, there's an assessment going on. Should I go in there? Is this too dangerous? Is this going to be safe or not? But I would say that in that circumstance, you as a first responder have been trained to just do and go, because you know the outcome could be worse if you don't. Right? And then you'll be held responsible. So that's more of an instinctive pushing through the courage barrier, which I would see that as a physical courage requirement, as opposed to a psychological courage required to push through a thinking or something that is internally driving you mad, essentially, and you need to figure out how to push through. And often this creates a fear of what's the outcome going to be. So you start to preempt and predict, because our brain is a predicting machine and it wants to predict all the things that's going to happen going forward. And so what happens is we tend to live in the future, which is like, well, this may not work out, so I don't think I'll do it. And that's that fear. So that's the psychological fear barrier. But what you're explaining is more the physical fear. What's the physical fear that this could harm me? And so this is one of the levels of safety in our human condition, is to be mindful of physical fear, which is no different to someone approached you in the street who's aggressive. There's a physical threat going on, and you need to make a decision to either fight, freeze, or flight, which is your nervous system is already thinking about that before your brain can even kick in to figure out what's going on. And so some people have got the courage to stand up to that and go, I'm just going to fight back. And so that's a level of courage, but that's getting through the physical challenge of safety versus on a different scale. Courage requires a level of thinking, a level of pushing through, a level of intention of what you want to do and achieve, assuming that those goals are valuable to you and you want to push through. Where you're going to come up against is because your brain is going to predict that things aren't going to work out, going to create this, the science is that we've got a 10-to-1 negative bias. So that's a lot of bias to work up against.
So I'm going to pause you for just a second.
Yeah, sure.
10-to-1 negative bias. Tell me more about that.
Well, if you think about how we feel about our life's journey, there's always more negative things that we analyze than positive things that we analyze. And again, I go back to the nervous system has evolved over more years than we can even comprehend. It's 65 plus million years and think about your nervous system as a hard drive in the computer. So it's the system that we've been given. We've evolved over 60 plus million years. So the reason why it's survived and thrived over 65 million years is because it's kept us safe. Otherwise, if it didn't keep us safe, we probably would have been eaten or destroyed by some other creature on the planet. So there's a you can process it that way and go, well, so this creates fear. So whenever we're in danger, our nervous system is always looking for danger in our environment. Of course, in the societies that we live now, all the threats that were present to us 100,000 years ago, a million years ago, and so on, are not in existence now. But unfortunately, the computer hard drive that we got, which runs our life, our nervous system, has still got all this in it from all that time. So therefore, we're reacting to everything that may be perceived as a threat.
Yeah.
So from there, the antidote to fear, which comes up from wanting to be safe, is courage. So if fear pops up, the way to overcome fear is that you have to have some level of courage to push through that barrier. And our mind starts to create, as I said, it's a predicting machine. It's going to predict on the other side of fear, there's things that are bad that we need to be careful of. That creates the 10-to-1 negative bias. Now, I would say from the human condition, how I've understood and learned, is that most of it's made up in our mind. Most of it's not real.
Yeah. Our minds are amazing at being able to make stuff up, right?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I've had conversations in my head. I'm not proud to admit it, but I've had conversations in my head, dozens, maybe probably thousands, that never actually occurred in life. But I was running all the possibilities through. I was predicting what this other person might say, how they might react, and playing through how that conversation might go. Or if later on how that conversation could have went, if I thought of those really great things to say in reply when I should have, but I didn't. So, okay, so how do we, all right, so if we know we have a 10-to-1 negative bias, if we know that we're thinking about things that could happen to us bad in the future, how do you overcome that then? Because I'm guessing that you have ways that if you know we got this problem, here's a solution for it, or some ideas on how to deal with this problem, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, I think, again, from the deconstruction process, the first part is becoming aware of it, becoming aware that unconsciously your nervous system is going to create this bias to keep you safe. And that's an automatic reaction within us. So it's not a sign of weakness, or it's not a sign of, this shouldn't be happening to me. I shouldn't be feeling fearful. I've done this many times before. It's like, you talked about public speaking before, and, you've done plenty of it, and I'm doing more and more. It doesn't mean each time we step up to the plate, our nervous system doesn't go, oh, I hope this all works out. I hope I don't trip over and hit my head on the floor, or I hope I don't, stumble my words. I hope I get my message clear. Like, this is negative bias coming up. And yet at the end of it, when you're done it, you go, okay, that went pretty well. That, as well, worse a human or no better human at going through it. Nobody's hurt you or whatever it is. So the challenge is that the starting point is to understand that it exists, and it's very normal of the human condition to feel fear around stuff, because our mind will start to predict bad outcomes, and it's all there to protect you as a human, as a person, so you don't get hurt. The challenge is, so if we think about this as that's at the unconscious level, and that's an emotional system within us that's creating these feelings, and it's going to deliver it all the time. Then we got to use our thinking system. So that's the higher order brain to go, okay, why am I feeling the way I'm feeling? What is this really? So in other words, you ask your brain a question to figure out, what's this feeling I'm feeling? Why am I feeling feared? Why am I getting nervous? And so fortunately, as we've evolved throughout history, about 100, according to the books, 110,000 years ago is our higher order brain, or what we call the prefrontal cortex or the neocortex, that area of the brain, which is the latest developed, helps us strategically think through life and figure stuff out, deconstruct. But because that came way after the emotional system, which has been going for 60 odd million years, that's the most powerful system within us. So it's going to create this fear because it wants to keep us safe, because you never know what's going to come around a corner and attack us and hurt us. So the process is become aware that this negative bias is going to pop up, accept it, because some people don't accept it. So if you don't accept anything, you're never going to take the action required to fix it. And that's, go back to life journey. There's a lesson there, is that people who stay in denial about things will never take the appropriate action to move them to where it is they say they want to go. Yeah. So if the emotional system, our nervous system at work, is creating this bias, left unchecked, so this is the key bit. If you leave that unchecked, it'll keep on doing that. It'll just keep on finding negative bias. It'll keep on doing that. The people who achieve in life, people who get through this barrier, are the ones that are able to go, okay, I appreciate that there's a negative bias here. And it gets described in all sorts of ways, create the voice in your head that tells it to settle down, all that. But really, at a basic level, what's happening is our emotional system has taken over in that moment. And this, we talk about first responders and police and things that you've spoken about, Kerry, many, many times. That's what's going on. The emotional system is kicked in. And if you react to the emotional system, it's most likely going to end up badly. And you talk about the prefrontal cortex, the PFC kicking in. So what I'm saying is that if we know that and understand and accept that the emotional system is going to create this feeling within us, which creates that fear, it's 10-to-1 negative bias because that's its job, well, then we can use our higher order brain to analyze what actually is that feeling. Is it appropriate for this moment? Should I pay attention to it or should I not? And if we, in the space of less than 30 seconds, you can ask your brain that question, it automatically starts to settle down that feeling because you've acknowledged it, you've named it, you've understood it's there. Mm-hmm. One of the challenges is that it escalates because it keeps feeding on itself, that emotion. So as soon as you fear something in front of you, your nervous system goes, right, panic. We need to be wary of this. And left unchecked to go, well, is this really a danger? What's really going on here? And you're not using your higher order brain to manage your emotional system. I suppose that's the key point here, is that it's normal for your nervous system to react the way it does. Fear is a normal part of the human condition. And also what you can be trained and learn to do is to use your higher order brain to manage that. You're not going to get it to go away. Mm-hmm. And over a period of time, when these situations arise, and this is now what we call confidence or experience, okay, I've had that happen before. This is how I've reacted. I've created neural pathways that says, do this, do this, do this. And that alleviates the tension. Because it's the tension in the nervous system that creates the feeling to alert you. It's there for a purpose. It's there to help you navigate your life, to keep you safe. But left unchecked, it could work against you, is probably the message here.
That all makes sense.
Just sort of breaking it down sometimes helps put the pieces of the puzzle together, that deconstruction process.
That's brilliant. And when I go to remodel my bathroom, I know exactly how I need to do it too. So
yeah. I mean, try putting new taps on top of the old ones.
Right. Doesn't work. So if you'd be open to it,
yep.
Can I share a technique I've used to help?
Always looking to learn, Kerry.
And kind of break it down and tell me what you think about it. That'd be okay?
Yep.
All right.
Yeah. So, that sounds good.
I'll give you an example. I went through the promotional process a couple of different times, more times than I'd like to think. And the promotional process to become a sergeant had changed. And it became this series of interviews. It used to be just one interview, one and done, that was it. Then it became a series of interviews and answering questions in front of a board of 3 people or so. And some agencies use more people for an interview board, but there was always a tremendous amount of stress when I was about ready to walk into whatever hotel they had set up or whatever the interview space was.
Yeah.
And I kind of cobbled together a couple of ways of dealing with this stress.
Yeah.
And the one that's for me seemed to be really effective. And it was before I knew all about the neuroscience stuff of this. And now when I look back, it makes total sense. But I would put my right hand on my heart. I would put my left hand on my gut. The heart because of the heart center, and because my decision-making center, there's 3 in the body: head, heart, and gut. My gut is the strongest. And most people feel like you feel whatever you can figure out very quickly, which your primary decision-making center is you'll feel it. You either know something or you'll feel it in your heart or feel it in your gut. And I found that most people, it's their gut. So I put my right hand on my heart, my left hand on my gut, and I would say, thank you for letting me know that I'm in danger. Will you work with me to succeed at this? And I would literally either out loud if I was in the car before I went in, or in my head, if I could do that. And if I couldn't do that, I would at least acknowledge and say, yeah, I'm scared and I gotta get through this. Help me.
Yeah.
And whether it's a prayer or meditation, whatever approach anyone takes, I've talked to people that I've taught that technique to, who've used it very successfully. And, if I'm going into a gun battle or I'm going into a burning building, I don't have time to stop and go, okay, right hand on heart, left hand. That's not an appropriate time for that. But when you have that time, I found that worked for me and it's worked for others. What are your thoughts with this, with all of your knowledge about this 10-to-1 negative bias and pushing up the courage and against the fear wall? What are your thoughts on that process?
Yeah, well, I think two different things. So firstly is that instinct. So when you're running into the building, you definitely don't have time to analyze. And again, to really get clear about, your nervous system will kick in and do its thing, right? So when you're driving down, just visualize this. You're driving down the highway and you're listening to a podcast and you're paying attention. So your higher order brain is listening, interpreting what's being said. Not dissimilar to what people listening to this right at the moment will be doing. They'll be probably driving the car or doing some other activity, which is also happening automatic in the background. So, through trained ways. In other words, you trained how you drive your car. That's the mammalian part of your brain that just puts things in things and does it repetitively, no different to you tying your shoelaces. So you're driving down the highway and you're listening to Kerry on his podcast, and you got this fascinating person on there that you're listening to, right?
You're right.
And you're getting interested. And you're following the conversation and you're focused in on, yep, that makes sense to me. And you're putting this all together. Your brain's doing all this. And all of a sudden, someone from the right lane cuts across the left lane to you. Things you have to, your foot goes to the brake, you stop, you sort of look at what's going on. There's another car that comes across and you've gone potentially 30, 40 seconds down the road, managing all this, making sure you don't crash, you did that, you stop, whatever. And guess what happened to your brain who was listening to that podcast? It shut that down in a millisecond and it focused on the ever-present danger. Like it just automatic. It's not until then, okay, danger's passed, and you go, oh, what was that on the podcast? Oh, I missed that thing. I think I'll stop and think. So the point of that is that our brain, our nervous system will always kick into that danger. It'll always, and in your case, when you ran into that building, there was no time to think. It's just instinct. You've been trained to do that. That's what you do. I'm not thinking about, oh, I've got to go and have that presentation. I'm going to dirty my suit. I'm going to, all these things. There was no processing of that.
Yeah.
On reflection, you might have done. So the challenge is that when we have time to think, so this is the point I'm making here, is that when we have time to analyze a situation, we're going to think about all the things that could go possibly wrong. When the car's coming across you, you don't go, hang on a minute, I'll just pause the podcast. I'll push my finger, I'll stop that. I'll come back to that later. I'll just deal with this swerving car in front of me first, and then I'll go back to that. There's none of that, right? So the challenge for people to understand is this is happening to your brain all day, every day.
Yeah.
Right? So the alert system, the danger, is on all the time. So if you're given half an hour to think about, going on a podcast, standing in front of an audience, whatever it is that is fearful for you because you haven't done it before, or you haven't had enough practice, or you don't have confidence around that, it's automatic that this feeling is going to come up. But the way to break that circuit down is to ask your brain a question. Why am I feeling this way? What is really happening here? And now you potentially name it. And so one of the things that I've learned through the psychology fields is you got to name it to tame it.
Yeah.
A feeling. and then you got to feel it to heal it. Right? So if it's causing you problems, this feeling or this emotion, and you are pushing it aside and pushing it aside and pushing it aside and pushing it aside, you're not feeling it, you're not going to be able to heal it. So a nice little phrase is you got to name it to tame it, and then feel it to heal it. So the first bit of naming it to taming it is like, well, what's really the worst thing that can happen by me pushing through this courage, this barrier that requires courage? Like, let's say it doesn't work out and your predicting brain is right. Is this really going to change who you are? Is this really going to cause you to go backwards in your life, or is it going to take you forward? And this creates self-doubt, which is another field in itself. Is that why do we get this self-doubt? Well, the self-doubt comes about that fear that you're not pushing through. And what I've learned to understand around this, and very maybe insightful for some people, is that the reason you have self-doubt or you have that fear because of the consequences that you've created on the outcome of whatever it is you're trying to do, which is generally you have created those consequences. You have said, this is really important to me. I've got to do this right. Otherwise, if I fail, it's going to be X, Y, Z. You put all this. So you're creating the consequences, which actually increases the fear. So when you let go of the consequences and you don't worry about the outcome, you worry about just presenting and doing your thing in the moment, the consequences are less playing a part in your mental state, and therefore you actually perform better. You are in a more positive state, which is another thing. Another area here is that when you're in a fearful state, you're in a negative emotional state. Not good things happen in a negative emotional state. What we've learned from the neuroscience is that when we're in a positive emotional state, good things happen to us. So we need to shift ourselves from this negative state to the positive state. And a circuit breaker is to ask your brain a question, because now it has to think. Left unchecked. So I think the moral of this, where we're getting around here, Kerry, is that for people to really understand this at, as you said, 4th grade level, is if you leave your emotional system unchecked, it'll just keep on going and creating neural pathways in your brain that create this fear. But we need to use our developed prefrontal cortex to stop that process. It doesn't mean that it's not going to always come up. It's always going to come up. But emotional resilience is about understanding when you're feeling a certain way, but then having the tools to put it at bay, to calm it down, to not. So, and I've heard you talk a lot about this in that first responder field. So you can probably extrapolate that a bit further about when you're in a dangerous situation, if you react to that and allow your emotions, it generally doesn't end well.
Correct. And we've seen that. I mean, you can go on YouTube and search for pursuit ends with man beaten. And it's the officers at the end of a pursuit, and suspect crashes and runs, and then the officers catch him, and then there's a use of force. And the emotions have taken over the situation. They're not logically thinking, okay, I got him in custody, got him handcuffed. It's all of the emotional surge that has taken place during however long that pursuit is. And it doesn't have to be a long pursuit. It doesn't have to be an hour. It doesn't have to be 33 minutes. It can be 30 seconds. And it's still that same emotional intensity, whether it's 30 seconds or 30 minutes. In fact, I'll say this. I'd rather have a pursuit go 30 minutes than 3 minutes. Because at the 30-minute mark, you've at least had some time to kind of process that. In 3 minutes, you have no time to process it. 30 seconds, you don't have time to process it. And it's just 100% emotions. And so brilliant stuff, Torrin. Brilliant stuff.
I think just thought of something to loop back to what you said, that process where you put your hand on your heart and your hand on your gut, and you're asking your body to work with you essentially. Mm-hmm. To put a circle around this and to break it right down, is that really what you're doing is you're taking your nervous system out of that a negative emotional state, agitation, tension, and you've got a process to calm it down, to put it into a positive emotional state. And if we understand the science around that, when we're in a negative emotional state, we're not thinking clearly, our higher order brain shuts down, we don't make good decisions, we panic, we get fearful. But in a positive emotional state, our prefrontal cortex is engaged, it's thinking, it's working it out. So being in a positive emotional state is the better place to be. And unfortunately, a lot of people get stuck in this negative emotional state, not just for 10 minutes, an hour, a day, a week, but sometimes years consistently, because that's their go-to. That's that I'm just going to look at everything negatively because my nervous system's told. And yet you've got, well, okay, well, maybe if you shift into the positive emotional state, you'll see the same thing differently. And there's lots of science and lots of work around how this is so powerful. So I think what would be really good for people to understand, and one great takeaway from today, is take control using your higher order brain. Have a method, whether it's hand on heart, whether it's ask yourself a question, taking a deep breath. One of my older brothers has always said to me, it's like, drop your shoulders, take a deep breath. That's just his go-to. And there's still, I don't think we've figured out, after 60 odd million years of evolution, any better way to settle down the nervous system but to take breath, to really breathe. That's actually one of the best ways to settle down your nervous system, take out the tension, and what that does is helps your brain engage and helps your nervous system just settle down. And so, and because what happens is, all these chemical reactions happen. You do get tense, your shoulders come up, you get into a position of, I'm going to get ready to fight, and the adrenaline kicks in. And so this is what's happening, is that your emotions are driving everything, as they always do in my world. And we need to find a circuit breaker. And then what happens is you become good at instinctively bringing those circuit breakers in challenging moments. And that's because of repetition, because you've done it before. So go back to the cops on the beat that approach a car. They've done this maybe 10, 15, 20, 30, 100 times before. Their nervous system, they know that. They've trained themselves. Now, when you're calm and you approach and you're not aggressive, that generally calms the nervous system down of the other person, which is another great point, is that if you're in a negative emotional state, you're never going to be able to shift another person into a positive emotional state, right? So unless you're in a positive emotional state, i.e. in that situation, if you're not in a calm, positive state, you're never going to calm down someone who's angry if you're angry.
And for our regular listeners and anybody who's been through any of Ideas training, when Torrin says negative emotional state, you can just, the phrase he's using is what we call survival state. When he talks about positive emotional state, it's what we call executive state. Yeah. And with, if I'm in survival state, and the reality is this, every single traffic stop that a law enforcement officer makes, everybody's in survival state. The officer is in survival state walking up because they don't know who's in that car, and there's danger in that. They don't know if that person's a little old blue-haired raisin-head lady at 88 years old who's just, accidentally speeding or ran a red light or has a tail light out, or whatever the situation is, or if it's some hardened parolee at large gang member who's got a gun in his lap and he's getting ready to kill you. You don't know. Yep. And so you're in survival state. That driver, we've identified so many of the different fears and emotions that a driver is feeling when they're pulled over. And nowadays, they've been, a large part of the United States population has been conditioned through mainstream media to fear what the police officer is going to do or deputy is going to do to them. So the driver's always in survival state. And so what we teach is, you, as a law enforcement officer, you have to shift yourself into executive state, because otherwise what happens is the mirror neurons that are in the other person's brain are going to pick up on you being in survival state, and it's going to trigger them into survival state even deeper, because their brain is going, well, if the cop is in survival state, I really need to be scared, because now he's or she is really unpredictable. And some of these encounters with the public just on the law enforcement end go negative. On the medical services, it was shocking to me. One of the reasons that we got into serving medical services is because I was blown away by the number of physical assaults that occur in medical provider situations at a hospital, not just the emergency room, up on the medical treatment floors, nurses, doctors, staff members that are assaulted by patients' families, by patients. It's crazy that, and you don't hear about that stuff, what is happening. And so being able to shift yourself into executive state or positive emotional state allows you the opportunity to then reach into that other person's brain, flip a switch, and they don't even know that you did it. They just know they feel more calm. But you can't do that if you're in survival state. It doesn't allow it to happen. I'm so glad that you brought that up, because I 100% agree with you on that. And when you understand the neuroscience behind all this, where you're going, okay, I got mirror neurons going on. I got a mirror neuron gap that's happening. And I can use that gap to my advantage. And my advantage being, we can get everybody calm and their PFCs or prefrontal cortex back online. Because when we're in a negative emotional state, the PFC shuts off. That's the functional MRIs tell us that. It's scientifically proven. Literally, when you think, I couldn't think of a good answer, you're right. It's not your fault, because part of your brain was shut down.
Yeah. So
and Torrin and I have an answer for how to fix that. So it's awesome.
Yeah, and I think, as I said, it's still part of the understanding and breaking it down. And when you become aware and accept that this is going on, then potentially you can create an action or a pathway, a tool that you can use. And then when you believe that that's going to help you, and you start getting new evidence that it does, well, then it becomes part of your neural pathway, and you think that's what we call confidence, right? Is that when we know we got something that works for us, I'm confident in that process. No different to, I go up on stage and I've got a structure and how I'm going to present, what I'm going to talk. I've done that now 100 times. I've got confidence in what that is. So your brain goes into this process. And so that's essentially what you're doing, is you're putting yourself into that positive emotional state, and all good things happen in that place. So it's fascinating stuff. There was one other thing that just escaped me now when you were talking, that you triggered me to think about, but it'll come back to me. Sorry, it's gone now.
Okay, that's all right. So here's what we're going to have to do. We'll have to have you back on another episode of the De-Escalation Conversations podcast, so that, and when this thought pops into your head, you'll be able to write it down, and then we'll make sure that we talk about it in the next episode. How's that sound? You open to that? Yeah,
sounds fantastic. And I think probably what around that, or just 1 minute around this, is that in those moments of tension, it is normal for both parties. So in that police situation, but maybe we just jump out of that scenario and I'll take you into my world of helping business owners, because it's no different there and other areas, right? So let's say in a sales process, which is the spearhead of everybody's business, without sales, businesses, the wheels don't move in a business. And in a sales process, remembering the negative 10-to-1 bias is that your prospect, or the person that you're trying to help influence, become compliant to whatever it is you've got to offer. There's the solution to their problem. If they're stuck in that a negative emotional state, and you haven't shifted them to the positive emotional state, they'll always see your product through that lens, and they'll never see it through what it really can do to help them, because they're stuck in this negative emotional state. So we all, and I just remembered what that was, for people to really understand this, is that energy, right? So there's lots of energy flowing in that tension moment when you're approaching that car, or when you're in the sales process. There's energy flowing from both parts, and your nervous system is way, way more attuned to that energy and what's going on than your intellectual brain can process. So the energy, your nervous system is doing all this. So the example is, when you've come home from a day at work, whatever it is, and you're in a good state, and you've had a good day, you potentially had some success, or you've achieved your goals for that day, and you've walked in home, and your significant other person that you live with, your carer, your partner in life, or whatever that may be, without them saying a word, you can feel that they're not in a good place, right? And that's that energy. So this, just for people to understand, is that we've all had this experience where we've walked in and go, oh, what's wrong with her, him, them, whatever. And it's, what does that do to you? It shifts you in an instant. Not in, you can't even measure it. It's that quick, from your own positive emotional state into a negative emotional state, because of that energy you're getting from that other person. Left unchecked and not analyzed, you will fall into that negative emotional state. And next thing you know, you've got bad energy going back and forth. All right. So this is, so the reason I brought that up and wanted to bring that up is that just to highlight, this is happening all the time within us in every interaction, that you're in a good place, you're in a good positive emotional state, you encounter someone else in whatever it is that you're doing who is not, and that's going to impact you. That's actually called emotional refraction. So you're refracting another person into a different state, from one state to another. And it left unchecked and not becoming aware of that, it takes you into a spiral that necessarily you don't want to go. You need to have a circuit breaker. You need to be trained to think about what, and that's simply a question, a step back, a breath, whatever works for you, to then let the person be understood. So the nervous system of the person, like go back to your guy in the car, the cop approaching, the thing that's creating tension with the person in the car is they want to feel understood. They want to go, well, the reason you pulled me up, or whatever it is, or the problem is, and if the police officer doesn't make them feel understood, that's going to create tension. They're going to keep them negative. One of the antidotes to moving someone from a negative emotional state into a positive emotional state, which we teach in our trainings and that, is to make them feel understood. When that person feels understood, their nervous system calms down, they move into the positive emotional state, and now they're ready to listen. Now they're ready to listen and become compliant and influenced with whatever it is you're trying to portray that message. But if they don't feel understood, so in a business, in a sales process, if your client doesn't feel understood in what it is that you understand their problem is, they're not listening to your solution. They've switched off. So the reason why sales conversion rates are so low is because people in the sales profession, they just want to tell them about their own, how good they are and everything they've got that's going to solve their problem, but they're not actually listening to that person's nervous system go, what actually is your problem? Maybe I haven't got it right. And when they feel understood and their nervous system, now they're in a positive emotional state, they're now ready and open to listening. So that's a pro tip for all the business people out there. Make sure your clients feel understood and understand that this is a biological thing that's going on within that person. They need to shift from a negative emotional state to a positive. If you're not paying attention to that, you're not going to get the influence and the compliance that you're looking for in results. So yeah, that was what was going on in the back of my mind. So I had needed to get it out, Gary. Otherwise, it would have bothered me all day.
We can't have that. And
No.
and everybody who's listening to this benefits from that. You know, it's interesting, Torrin, what you just covered over the last few minutes, because one of our core teaching principles is everybody in the world has an addiction, and it's the same addiction, and that addiction is to be understood. Exactly what you were just talking about. We teach that, and there's not a training that we do that doesn't have that core principle in there. Everybody is addicted to feeling understood, and it's not just feeling understood. There's a subtle difference on this that I really like to make. It's not just that they feel, or that you're making them feel understood. It's that you actually demonstrate that understanding.
Yeah.
And that's a 2 millimeter shift from, oh, I'm making them feel understood. Well, how do you do that? By actually demonstrating that you do understand them.
Yep.
And you know, it's funny. Just last night, I was sitting at dinner. I was in Huntsville, Alabama, at the NASA Space Center. We were there. I taught earlier in the day, and I was talking to the wife. She's an officer on the agency that I had trained. She'd been at the training, and she's also the wife of a very good friend of mine. And we were talking about something. She was sharing some personal experiences with me. And I said to her, wow, it sounds like that must have felt like a setback. And she said, and to me, I was dead on. It had to feel like a setback. I felt so comfortable when I said that. I still qualified it. But I was like, oh, I'm dead on this one in my head, you know. And she said, well, actually, it wasn't a setback. It was an opportunity to, and then she expanded on it. I'm like, wow. A couple of nuggets came out of that. Number one, dial yourself back care. Number two, what an insightful woman. This lady, and I mean that with a capital L, she didn't take something in a negative way. She didn't have a negative bias toward it. Instead of what I certainly would have perceived as a setback, she looked as an opportunity to expand in a different area. It's like, that's freaking brilliant. And I'm so glad that I left, because even though I felt very confident in what her experience had been, I still left wiggle room there just in case I was wrong, even though I didn't think I was. I still left that wiggle room. And when I was wrong, it was okay. And it was interesting. She's like, no, she explained that. And then we had a great conversation about this opportunity and what it meant for her, what it meant for her child. So, yeah. But in doing that, that's one way to demonstrate your understanding is being able to label that and allow them to confirm it or shift it, and not do it in a way where they have to push back against you, but in a way that leads the conversation forward. So brilliant stuff. Brilliant stuff.
That's very powerful. I think, that's I know we're running out of time, but a good segue into going back to that self-doubt and that negative bias is, and I mentioned that, the consequences that you put on the outcome often is driving the self-doubt or the fear. And a bit like what that lady just did is in that conversation is that whichever way it goes, I'm going to see the benefit in it. So she's put a benefit on the consequences, good, bad, or otherwise. And so the way to process this and to train yourself in, emotional development is, yes, I got self-doubt around this. I can understand the fears. I'm going to go and use courage to push through. Whatever happens on the other side of it, if it works, that's a benefit. If it doesn't work, I've learned something that's a benefit. How am I going to use that going forward? So what you're doing is you're training yourself to see the benefit in the consequences of the outcome versus there'll be 10 things that can go wrong and one that could go right, that 10 to 1 negative bias. And that is enough to stop you even having an attempt. And the other thing I will say, and this is very, very normal for all of us. So when you heard that person's story and you said that must have been a setback, very normal, by the way, that's actually your negative bias applied to that. Not in a bad way, but that's what we do. That's what happens.
I totally agree with you.
We're analysing that and go, oh, that must have been, that's your negative bias kicking in. And so the great learning for you there in that moment, and certainly me as I'm reflecting on what you just said, is that we are opposing we're doing this naturally all the time, is putting our negative bias in a situation because that's what our nervous system is built to do. That's my overarching message today, is that our nervous system is built to do this. Work with it, don't work against it.
Yeah, and that's I'm gonna leave it at that. Work with it, not against it. I think that's going to be the tagline of the show today, and I appreciate that. Hey, when we get back together for another episode, I'm just going to plant the seed in your head. And I've been writing down notes and stuff while we've been chatting. but this emotional refraction. I want to dive into the next time we do an interview, and I know you're incredibly busy. I'm so honored by the time that you've given us in the wisdom and the insights. But this emotional refraction, I just want to plant the seed in our listeners' heads. I want you to think, and you and I've talked about emotional refraction before.
Yep.
Every time that term comes up, I have this visual that I flash to, and it happened again today when you threw out that term. I remember having on my sliding glass door at my very first house I ever bought. The sun would come in the afternoon through this window, and I had a suction cup with a little hook on it.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Hanging from that suction cup was a prism.
Yep.
And when the sun came in and struck that prism, what would happen is, and it wasn't big, it was
Yep.
I don't know, 3.5 inches long. It wasn't big. But when the sun hit that prism, the color spectrum that went across my kitchen, I would sometimes walk into that room and I'd be like, whoa, what's going on? And I'd look over and the sun was just at the right angle. And it was all these different colors in the color spectrum. And it was fascinating to me that there could be a red going in that direction and a purple going in that direction and a blue going in that direction and a green going over here. And so every time you've brought that term up, I always think of that, because that was one of my favorite memories of that house, was seeing that happen, and nature coming in, and the wonder of a prism, and just being in the right place at the right time to experience it.
Yep.
But no matter what direction the light went in, there was something cool that came out of it.
Yep. That's lovely. It's great. Yeah. So that process, I think, I'm not a scientist when it comes to that, but that's actually a refractoring process. You got light coming in one side, that changes the color of it. So here's a thought. That's what we're doing as humans. So I can refract your emotional state based on how I respond to what it is you're saying or doing. So if you want to influence or get someone compliant to whatever it is, because we want to connect with humans, that's the other thing our nervous system wants to do. It wants to connect. That's how it's survived and thrived. Way to do that is to building relationships is about emotionally refracting. Is that how do we get them to feel they like us and we like them? And so, straight away, you've spoken to someone for 3 to 5 minutes, you go, don't really like this person. And then you spoke to someone for 3 to 5 minutes and you go, I like this person. So they're refracting on you, changing your state to give you that feeling. If you had a negative emotional state, you'd go, I don't like them. If you got a positive emotional state, you do like it. And 3 minutes is not enough to your brain to analyze, is Kerry a good guy? Is Torrin a good guy? Should I like him? Should I not? But your nervous system is way ahead of the game. And that's that emotional refraction.
Yeah. And and one of the things that we teach is those decisions are made oftentimes in milliseconds, even without you being aware of it. In fact, I want to close up our interview today. I'm just going to throw, listeners, we're not going to go deep into this. We're going to be wrapping this up in the next minute or so, but I'm going to talk briefly about your reticular activating system, your RAS, R-A-S. What I want you to do, just as a quick exercise, and Torrin, you can do it with me, and listeners, do this. I want you to wiggle your toes. Just wiggle your toes. 1 foot, doesn't even have to be both feet, but just on 1 foot, wiggle your toes. And I want you to feel, if you're wearing a sock, the sock that is around your toes, and maybe even there's a shoe around your foot. And what's interesting to me, fascinating actually, is how our RAS filters out everything. And you talked about this before. It filters out everything that's not critical, that's not important. And it shoves it down into our subconscious, our unconscious, or non-conscious. and what our conscious level is right now, you're aware of the sock around your toes and maybe the shoe around your toes as well, but you're aware of the sock, or you're aware of, no, I'm not wearing socks. I've got flip-flops on, or I'm barefoot and I don't have a sock, but you're aware of it.
Yep.
15 seconds ago, you were not even remotely thinking about that sock wrapped around your foot, and now you're highly aware of it. And as we think about the ability of our brain to influence us, to influence other people, how can we have a better life? How can we show up as our best self? Having that awareness, bringing it to the front of our mind, literally the PFC, the prefrontal cortex, bringing it to the front of your mind so that you interact in the most positive way, whether it's to make a sale for your business, to be able to help the customer, which is the best form of sales is there is an exchange of money, but you're receiving that money because you're going to truly help this other person. And oftentimes that thought alone gets you through any sales fears that you might have, is you really are benefiting this other person. They are coming out ahead because of what you're doing with them in exchange for that money. Or you're interacting with the people in your family, your kids, your wife, your partner, or coworkers, or the communities that you serve, whatever that community is, whether it's a community of business owners or the community that you serve as medical services provider, your classroom full of kids, or the teachers that you serve as a superintendent. The point is that you can be more aware of this, and you can be the best person, your best self, to be able to fill that role for what's needed, and just being really aware of that. So, Torrin, thanks for being here today. Is there any last closing thoughts you want to leave with the listeners before we bounce?
I think
tapped out, or tell
no.
me.
I feel energized. I've got many things I'd love to share, and but I think just wrapping that last bit you said, which is super important, that, and I say this to my business coaching clients and mentoring, is that self-awareness is the number one skill in business. So becoming aware of what's around you, how you're interacting, who you are, how you're impacting the people around you. So becoming very self-aware is a skill that, and it is a skill to keep on developing continuously forever. And that helps you on the pathway to evolve into a better version of yourself. Because one of the things I learned about human behavior is that when you learn more about yourself, you start to learn more about the people around you, because the systems that we all got, so the hard drives that we got, the nervous system, the programs that are in, pretty much we all got the same ones. It's just how they interplay with each other, which causes our individuality. But your nervous system is no different than mine, subject to any variances that, from a health perspective, that from a defect or something like that. But let's say 99.9% of the people on the planet have got the same nervous system, biological system. They've potentially got the programming, the emotional system, the thinking system, the doing system. These are the core systems. And when we understand and become self-aware of this, that can only help us navigate the pathway in life to whatever we're trying to achieve. And what I've learned on my journey is the more I've learned about myself around this, the more I've understood the people around me, the better I've been able to connect, and the better I've been able to get what it is that I'm striving to do, whatever that may be in whatever field of endeavor you're in. And so the parting words really is put a high priority on self-awareness in whatever you're doing, and that will lead you to where it is the knowledge you need to help you in your field of endeavor, whatever that may be.
Love it. Love what you share on a regular basis. Torrin, your heart is big, your head is big, and I don't mean that in a big-headed ego way. I mean it just full of knowledge, and you're true to your core. You're a good man with a good heart, and I'm blessed that you're with us today. I know our listeners will benefit, but there's not a minute of time that I spend with you that I don't benefit as well. So thank you for that gift.
Excellent. Appreciate the opportunity, Kerry. And I wish all your listeners well.
Thank you so much. Folks, if you're, as Torrin probably aptly described you, driving while you're listening to this, know that you can glance into the show notes, the ability to follow Torrin, get a hold of him. He's on LinkedIn. It's his name on LinkedIn, and all of that information about his contact will be in the show notes. If you've been watching this on video, you've been seeing periodically both Torrin's website and his LinkedIn profile have appeared on the screen multiple times during this show. And so you can also go into the show notes on YouTube or Facebook, whatever platform you're watching this on, and be able to just copy and paste that out. I highly encourage you to keep in touch with Torrin. He's just, you can't tap just below this. I mean, we got surface level of all the wonderful things that he has to share with you in our hour together. And there's just so much more. Again, I spend an hour with him every week and I learn new stuff all the time. So definitely stay in touch with Torrin. He's worth the investment of your time. Please go to our website, theidea.world. Click on whatever area that you're in. If you're in first responder, police, fire, medical services, school teacher, business, whatever area you're in, we have training available for you to be able to help you have a better life, to be able to help you calm an angry person in seconds. And oftentimes that starts with you. So please check out our website, theidea.world. And we have a new episode of De-Escalation Conversations that drops every Monday morning, 6 a.m. Pacific. So look for our next episode as well. Until next time, as always, stay safe. I hope you found a lot of great value in this episode of the De-Escalation Conversations podcast. Please be sure to go out to our website, theidea.world, THEIDEA.world. On that website, just click on the link that resonates with you most. If you're a K through 12 educator, if you're a firefighter, medical services, law enforcement, flight attendants, whatever industry you're in, we have specialized training for you. So check that training out, because literally it can save your life, it can save your relationship, it can save your career. So check out theidea.world. I'll look forward to seeing you soon. Take care.